Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. For those of you that have a small town, what did the innocent person do that shocked the community? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Man paraded around town for 3 weeks, his 3 kids in tow, pleading for his missing wife to return. Turned out he had already killed her and buried her in the basement. The fella who owned the local chip shop, pillar of the community, did some wonderful charitable stuff. Let pensioners have bags of chips for 10p, kidnapped a teenage girl, and kept her as an S-slave in her back of a van until she was discovered 2 weeks later. She started dating a really weird guy, and they decided to kill her still living parent. Can't remember if it was mom or dad. I think dad. I think they were high and did it in an incredibly violent way. The morning after the murder, they left the front door to the house open, and the family dog was found wandering around the cul-de-sac covered in their owner's blood. Back in the 70s, someone was harassing my great-aunt, never married and lived alone. Guy would come up in the middle of the night and beat the doors and windows and scream sexual things at her. She was scared, so my grandfather stayed the night with her for a few days until it happened again. When the pounding started, my grandfather threw the door open. The guy retreated into the darkness, but said he had a gun. Fun fact, so did Pappy. He shot what he assumed was the ground in front of the guy, and either the pellets deflected or he actually shot the guy in the leg directly. We'll never know. The man lived, and here's the twist. It was the sheriff. He was married, but would get shit-faced and go harass women in the middle of the night. Small town, it's easy to assume he was just another piece of shit. But everyone back there loved this guy. My grandfather ended up being hated by the entire community, except for by the few other women he was bothering. To this day, people with our last name still aren't really well liked there. Most people don't remember why, but that's how small towns operate. Not my town, but a lodge I worked at in a small town in North Carolina had this guy that was very friendly and well liked. Lots of repeat business because of him. Turns out, he was on the run for child abuse and KP stuff and was living there under a fake name. Somehow, he got word that the feds were onto him, and he killed himself by filling a backpack with rocks and walking out into the river in town and shooting himself. One day while I was working, this lady came in asking for Mike. My boss was like, let's take a walk. When they got back, she was crying. I just got in her car and drove off. Friend's dad used to volunteer at our school. He was the only guy there, but nice to everybody and regularly hung out with all the moms to do stuff for the kids. Our school required parents to spend X amount of time helping out. A very small and tight-packed community in a very rural area. I remember Friday playing with his daughter, one of my friends, and then saying goodbye as her mom went to go pick her up. Found out Monday that he shot my friend and her sister, and then turned the gun on himself in a murder-suicide. My high school had exactly one mature pine tree, desert Southwest State, which the stoners had long claimed as their own, the freak tree. Shade was in short supply on campus. There weren't many cool places to hang out. A couple of days before graduation, someone snuck on campus at night and cut it down. Reactions ranged from amusement to outrage, with bewilderment and disappointment being the consensus for most. A substantial reward was offered, but nobody ever got caught. I found out many years later that it was the student body president, total Goody-two-shoes honor student, Eagle Scout, pretty much the last person anyone would expect. He was drunk as a skunk, used a handsaw, still had bandaged blisters on both hands at graduation, but he told everyone he'd burned them in an accident. Not sure if you would consider him innocent, since there were always rumors about him but my town's former chief deputy was arrested a few weeks ago. Apparently, he was involved in a huge drug business and was supplying them with details that the police knew so they wouldn't get caught. In return, he was getting $10,000 a month. I live in a small city, about 13,000 people, the majority being farmers. But this is some law and order type crap. Now people are wondering if he was paid off in a lot of his cases, including a woman here who has been missing for over 30 years. Not really a person, but a couple people owning a business. There was a Lego store in my hometown that had been around for years. They got busted for paying people to steal Lego sets from local stores like Walmart and Fred Meyer's and stuff. When they got busted, they had over 4,000 Lego sets that had been stolen, worth over $200,000. Police caught them when they got a tip from someone who had stolen for them and hadn't been paid what he was promised. When they staked out the location, they saw several shady people go in with Lego sets and leaving empty-handed, and asked some of them, and they were happy to tell the cops that they had stolen and been underpaid for the Lego sets. Our local sheriff, rural area, was all about fighting drugs in our county. It was election time and a local drug dealer wanted him out, so he devised a scheme to have him killed. He conspired with a deputy of that sheriff, who decided to try getting elected as sheriff also, to hire a young guy who bought drugs from him to kill the sheriff. There was a cookout fundraiser at a local volunteer fire department a couple of months before the elections, where all the locals running for office would come to schmooze the community. The sheriff was there, and the shooter was hidden in the woods on a hill above. He shot and killed the sheriff on the spot, in front of a couple hundred people. He was caught by police and confessed the whole scheme. He was sent to prison along with the deputy and the drug dealer. The guy who did the shooting was from our community and was about 10 years younger than me. He was buddies with our neighbor's kid in their youth and used to come stay the night there often. Innocent to adults, not the kids who clocked him. Mr. H was the middle school computer science teacher from the 90s to 2015. All the adults thought he was a normal guy with a loving wife. Well, not only did he watch pee on the clock with kids in the classroom, he was actively stalking several girls online and trying to groom them. He knew the urban myths and used to get female students to trust him. Mr. H also was a white knight predator, pretending to protect his victims from online predators and offering himself as a safe resource to those in trouble. Mr. H was in my YouTube comments in 2008 and pretended not to know me. He called out the more flagrant pedo and pretended to be my friend. He love-bombed me with gifts as he tried to groom me. I sought him out when I was uncomfortable with what I was going through, not knowing the dude I was scared of was actually him. I deleted all of my social media when letters arrived to my house, and I never addressed what happened. In 2015, Mr. H was arrested for CSA and possession of CP. His aliases were revealed, and that's when I realized my computer science teacher had been grooming me and lying to me when I was 11. All the adults were shocked. Nobody suspected this, but looking back, yeah, the signs were there.
Well, it goes to stand that you never really know someone until you kind of know someone. A lot of facts about people that seemed on the surface to be nice and otherwise pleasant, but turned out to be monsters. So, trust that instinct and don't be shocked.
I worked with an English guy in France a few years ago. He was a lovely guy, very chilled. He once mentioned that he got money every month from the government back in the UK because of mental health problems. He didn't expand on this. About a year later, I found out that he'd gone back to the UK and had a complete mental breakdown. He started to think that he was in some kind of GTA-style video game, and his mission was to save some kids who had been kidnapped. He decided that these two brothers in the 80s had kidnapped the children, so he beat them to death and then beat another man also in his 80s to death. He's now locked up in a secure unit and I can't really imagine him ever getting out of there.
I had a girl that was my best friend in second grade. Let's call her Molly. She was so nice and bubbly. We had sleepovers at her house and hung out all the time. The next year I moved to a different school, and a couple of years later, she moved to a different town in the same state. We followed each other on Instagram, and right out of high school, around 18 years, she posted about having a child. The next year, she had another. The father was never posted, but she always had these adorable curated photo shoots of there, and I was happy for her. A year or so passed, and I get a Snapchat message from a girl that I had been friends with since elementary school, but hadn't talked to recently. I open it, and it's a link to an article from our local small-town newspaper. Front page is Molly's mugshot. Arrested for SA of a minor in a town she lived in. She had been assaulted a child in foster care. My jaw fell to the floor for a full minute or so. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around how evil she turned out to be. Feel sick for her children and that poor boy. We had a couple that were originally Vista workers, like the Peace Corps, but for domestically disadvantaged areas like Appalachia. The husband and wife were very active in the church and actually sang a song together the morning before bullshit. A random intruder of color broke in and killed the wife by hitting her dozens of times with a copper pipe filled with rocks. Anyway, the story was ridiculous even for the 90s in Kentucky, so the police searched the husband's car and found the bloody murder weapon. His defense at trial was that he took the murder weapon and hid it from police in his car because he was just so enraged that his wife had been killed, he wanted to kill with the same weapon. There was still a small contingent of people who believed this, but none of them were on the jury, and the guy got life in prison. The girl I grew up with was pretty shy but very sweet and gentle. She had very religious parents. After high school, she got pregnant but hid it all the while still living with them. She ended up having twins at home and must have had a mental breakdown. She either drowned or suffocated them both. She pled insanity, but it wasn't accepted, and she was sentenced to life in prison. I think she must have lost her mind temporarily because she really was such a sweet person. I went to church and Christian school with her, and her parents were probably the most conservative Christians at either. I'm sure that played into it. Maybe she thought that her entire family and social structure would disown her if they found out if she got pregnant out of wedlock. Tragic all around. My town is a massive city, but one particularly bad incident that comes to mind is I was standing in line for a burrito and looked up at the TV to see the mugshot of a very familiar face from elementary school, arrested for murder. The shock was that the guy who did it was the son of my school's social worker, who was the absolute sweetest lady, and he was raised so well by her. Never could have expected that of him, but he fell in with the wrong crowd and voila, committed murder with them. I lived in a small apartment building on the same floor as the middle-aged guy. He was usually well-dressed and would greet me in what felt like a calm, genuine way when I would see him in the elevator or down in the garage where he parked next to my car. One night I was coming home and I got into the elevator and he was there with a woman and they had just a night out together. He introduced her and I said hi to them and was happy that he seemed to have found someone nice. About a week later, I was getting into my car to start my morning commute and I saw the man rifling through his trunk looking agitated. I said hi and he didn't even respond to me, which was super out of the ordinary. Later that day, I was home from work and I got a knock on my door and it was a couple of police officers. They asked me if I had seen the man and I mentioned that I had seen him that morning. Turns out the night before, he stabbed that woman in his apartment like 30 plus times. As she lay dying, she wrote the man's initials in her own blood. After the man murdered her, he came home, cleaned himself up and went to work in the morning. This is when I saw him down in the parking garage. Turns out when the police came to my door, they already had him in custody and had arrested him at work and were asking the neighbors for any details about his actions after the murder, coming home, getting cleaned up, and going to work, etc. I was absolutely horrified and shocked and blown away by what had happened. Never would have expected it from this person given his demeanor and appearance. He sat in jail for a while awaiting trial, and after a couple articles were written about it, eventually he went to trial and was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. At some point, an auction company seized his apartment and had a day where people could come and bid on the contents of the entire apartment, It was so strange. An article I read about the case described how this poor woman's family members were concerned about the man she was dating and some aggressive behaviors he exhibited. Sadly, their intuition was right, and he was a monster. She had kids from a previous marriage. It was so heartbreaking to read about her family, to imagine what this horrible loss was like for them. A guy a bit older than me lived with his grandfather and grandmother. He was around 18 and his grandfather allowed him to wash and tend to the car. He spent hours polishing it, and in general, he was very quiet and nice, not like any other teenager, so he met a lady and decided to take her to the seaside, and his grandfather denied him the car. He killed his grandfather, and then his grandmother too, so that she wouldn't call the cops on him. He left with his girlfriend in the said car. In a week or so, the neighbors noticed the smell. He was arrested and I think got like 15 years in prison. I've moved since, but I'm terrified by the thought he's released and probably living in his grandparents' apartment. My high school math teacher of 2 years, junior and senior, he had worked at the school since it was built in the 90s. He was known to be very passionate about teaching math, and I remembered him fondly because I struggled. But he would be patient with me and even danced around and clapped when I got stuff on my own. He also had been the coach of the girls' volleyball team for years. A year after I graduated, he was outed by selling alcohol to minors as well as having inappropriate pictures he would take of his team without them knowing, despite all the evidence and a lot of parents rallied around him, but he did end up losing his job. Not sure what happened after that, as my town has purged anything about it online, because that is what they do with anything scandalous that happens. Guy whose family was a pillar of our church, his grandfather was one of the founders, always threw his weight around to bully people into what he wanted. He was super conservative and pretty bigoted, and he made sure our moderately liberal church hired a conservative pastor and drove out all the liberal people and converted the church to a more conservative denomination. It was horribly scarring to see him stand up in a congressional meeting and scream at my 90-year-old grandmother that she was a heretic for wanting to study the Bible actually says about homosexuality. Granny was very liberal and ahead of her time. The church split around gay marriage. Well, wouldn't you know, he was caught by a pedo chaser YouTuber who catfished him into believing he was meeting up with a 10-year-old boy for S. It's all on camera. He left town when the police got involved in utter disgrace. It's always projection, y'all. When I was in high school, the quarterback of our football team my senior year, a fellow classmate, was one of the sweetest guys in the class. Kind to literally everyone. Made people feel included, especially those who weren't popular. Overall, great guy. A few years later, we'd both gone off to different colleges. He went somewhere in the Midwest to play football. Our junior year of college, I heard from a close friend that he was back in our hometown after being found strung out on meth and lots of painkillers in the middle of the night firing a shotgun on someone's farm property. He had done so many drugs that he had an advanced level of brain damage. He had to relearn some motor skills, and he was, and as far as I know, still is, unable to work or do much independently. He's moved back in with his parents and will be living like that for the foreseeable future. I've been graduated for about 4 years now, so it's been approximately 5 years of this for him. Very, very sad story. And makes me wonder about if there was something behind his friendly persona in high school. Small town, farm town, USA. A girl in my high school senior class, all around goody-goody and the running to be valedictorian, sports star, soccer, basketball, track, all the teacher's favorite, wealthy family, all of that. Well, like 3 weeks before we were all about to graduate, her and her older brother went around and held a bunch of gas stations up at gunpoint. I think they hit 2. Didn't shoot anyone, just threatened a clerk with a pistol and asked for money. Then when they got to the 3rd one, the cops were already privy, and they got caught mid-robbery. At some point, one of them ended up shooting the gun at the cops. I don't remember what all the charges were and the sentencing ended up being. I'm sure because she was still in high school, they went easy on her, but yeah. Needless to say, she missed graduation. Yes, my hometown of roughly 7,000 people was scandalized. We were classmates. He was the sweetest boy everyone knew, an absolute social butterfly. He was on the spectrum, but everyone still loved and accepted him anyways. He remembered every name, greeted everyone when he saw us in the hallways, always had such a kind big smile and skip in his walk. This guy was a complete ray of sunshine. Even one day, when he was missing, the entire community got together to find him and make sure he got home safe. I left for 4 years to complete my degree, and when I came back, I learned from a friend who stayed that he really got into some hard drugs. Shortly before graduation had started. Got so bad he didn't finish school. He's been in and out of prison now, struggling to stay clean. It's a damn shame. I really miss him. We'd have some of the coolest conversations about hypotheticals and the universe. He would have been an amazing writer. Not as shocking as most of the other cases people shared here, but it's different enough that I think it's still interesting. So I grew up in a small village of less than 300 people, which means everyone knows every other. So my mom worked at the bank with this woman who had a husband and 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Both the kids were in the same school as me, but a few grades down, and one of my classmates would have been their cousin and the niece to that couple. Well, they would go to Mexico quite often, and they made friends with their American guy who ended up moving to the area, live in Alberta, Canada. Everyone thought things were fine. A few years later, the father and the son get into a car crash due to bad weather conditions and end up dying. Very shortly afterwards, the American guy ends up moving in with the widowed wife and they get married. Apparently they had been having an affair for years. Even before he moved to Canada, they'd hook up in Mexico. So that was a little bit of a shocker there. But that's not the end of the story. Just the first twist. Because a few years after that, the widow gets into a car accident herself and ends up hitting a moose. So she dies as well. Now, all that is left of her family is the daughter who's living with her American stepfather. Now, fast forward a few years. By this point, I've graduated from high school, but this daughter is still in high school. But do you remember how I mentioned my classmate was a cousin to this girl? Well, apparently, my classmate's father, which would be this girl's uncle, had been filling out his tax returns, saying that his niece was now a dependent of theirs and was living with them. And he was doing it for years. He was a well-respected member of the community, and his business was buying and selling fertilizer and other chemicals to the farmers in the area. So he knew a lot of people. But all that changed when a bunch of Canadian revenue agency agents showed up at his door and started asking where his niece was that was supposedly living with him. So he ended up being charged with tax fraud and hit with a hefty fine. So that ended up shocking a lot of people.